Okay. All right, everyone, welcome. Thanks for being here, Plant City. I'm Caitlin, one of the co-presidents of Climate Action, along with Jeff, who's on his way, I believe. And we're just so glad that you took, there was a lot of events happening this Thursday. Like once we claim this day, then other groups are like popping up. We're like, we really need a calendar here to coordinate. So we're glad that you chose our event and that you're here. Really excited to see you all and on Zoom as well. Before we launch into the topic, just a couple announcements from the CARI side. So we are attending a climate protest at the UN in New York City on September 17th. It's going to be big. A lot of organizations are participating. I think our bus is almost full, or there was one more seat.
It's full. There's a waiting list.
There's a waiting list, but it's fine. Get the Amtrak. That's what I'm going to do. Go down, have a night in New York, join us at the protest, and then, you know, it's a 3.5-hour train ride. So if any of you want to join, more than welcome. And there's more information on our website, but connect with our group. We get t-shirts and stuff, so we'll all find each other there. Also doing some final pushes for our endorsed candidate of Aaron Regenberg for the first congressional race. So there's an event on Sunday with Bernie Sanders at the Columbus Theater, a couple more phone banking opportunities as well. Will, if you have any more details on this?
Yes, there's phone banking every Wednesday and Thursday, and canvassing door to door on Saturday. And on the 29th, there is a debate of all the candidates on Channel 12.
Righty. Yeah. And so those are the main announcements. I think that's really what we've got going on. I don't think there's anything else from recruiting happening yet. All right, so really excited to dive into climate justice in Rhode Island tonight. This is a topic we've been exploring more, and we had a really interesting session in our April community meeting with Brianna Craft's book. I know a lot of you all were there, talking about a really interesting marriage of like global South justice with her own story of like justice in her home. That was a really powerful presentation. So there's like that level. I think a lot of us are familiar with stories of from other parts of the US, right? Of like Cancer Alley and petrochemicals. And then at the CARI level and the Providence team, there's always a lot happening in the Port of Providence, concern with that in terms of, you know, we know there's really high asthma, air pollution in South Providence, Washington Park, all these neighborhoods. So it's kind of like some cursory intros to the topic, but we're really curious in terms of the state, like what can we do, what's being done. Some of these agencies that y'all work at are getting on board, and it's really exciting to have you stationed there fighting the good fight. So we're all excited to hear how that's going and what the challenges are. We've designed the talk to leave a lot of time for Q&A, so we hope you brought your questions and totally open, safe space to ask anything that you may have questions about. So we're really lucky to have Chris Gaynor and Greg Ohadoma here with us. Chris has been a community organizer in resilience and climate change for years. He's been in the Peace Corps in Tanzania, in AmeriCorps, so a long history of service in Vermont before joining the Department of Environmental Management. And Chris, you've just had tons of amazing roles in different organizations, all with kind of a public service and nonprofit bent. So be curious if we have time in the Q&A, hear how you kind of evolved from that to the climate space and how that might be like personal for you as well. But let's hear for Chris. And Greg is the Energy Justice Manager at the Office of Energy Resources. He's got a lot of policy experience, bachelor's degree in Environment Natural Resource Economics from URI, multiple certificates, and worked in Clean Energy, Northeast Clean Energy Council before that, also in driving policy. So sounds like, Greg, you've had tons of policy experience, worked with Green Energy Consumers Alliance as well, community choice aggregation. So you've got that energy wonk background you're bringing to the justice fight. So that's going to be really valuable. And that's something that a lot of us lack, I think, and it's hard to learn about. He's also an intern for our fabulous Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, another climate champion. So let's hear it for Greg. All right, so first we are going to start off with Chris sharing from the DEM side a bit of how justice is structured there and what your work entails. And I will ask you to stand and talk into this.
Stand and talk into
this camera, please.
Right, cool. Wow, I'm way shorter than I thought I was gonna be. Awesome. Greg, you're gonna have to like do that. So hi everyone. My name is Chris Gaynor, he him pronouns, and I am the climate justice specialist with the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management in collaboration with the Nature Conservancy. So to answer the question of like, good, what do I even do? Like what's the job? And I see it as like it's twofold. And like first and foremost, while in the internal side of DEM is to ensure that justice and equity is incorporated in all strategic thinking, all of the policy goals, ensuring that at least from like the DEM side that the state is showing up for the needs of the community and including them in the conversations when it comes to projects. From the external side, and this is where I'm able to like move around a little bit more with like me being through the Nature Conservancy in coordination with the Department of Environmental Management. I can go out and engage. I can go out and have conversations with community members. I can do events like this. I can go into schools. I can go into different venues and kind of like share what climate justice is, share what that kind of community building is needed from all sides, because in order for us at the state side to like really like make moves and make those differences, we also need like public support, public engagement, and understanding what is the work that we are doing. So my entire role is to kind of just bridge those divides and ensure that transparency is like the forefront, at least for like DEM, as well as like making sure that like, you know, the concerns of community are just like right at the front of all conversations when it comes to projects with DEM. That's us, or that's me. So, is there anything else I should talk about?
How is this work like structured within the department?
I am directly in, or excuse me, I am situated directly in the director's office. Why does that feel redundant? But I am in the director's office, and what we have is the climate team, as he calls it, to where it is like myself, the director, our climate policy specialist, and my climate justice specialist. Then we have the chief of staff, and I forget one of my colleagues' titles, but all like 6 of us together, like we are the climate team, and we always like coordinate and collaborate on just generally what strategy, like what is the most efficient strategy, and you know, how do we implement this project? How do we coordinate with community? Who do we need to talk to? What is a priority of the Executive Coordinating Climate Change Council, the EC4, which is another or another entity that I am responsible for advising to ensure that the Act on Climate is fulfilled and that we are able to, you know, meet those mandates. So like I guess that answers the question, right? Like that is the structure. Like I am positioned right with the director.
Perfect. And it's originally come out of a secondment?
Hmm?
Did it originally come out of a secondment from Audubon?
Oh, this position is what you're asking. How did this come about?
Well, I just remember that you were seconded from another organization.
Oh, yeah. Like, well, like the previous organization I was in, that was the Climate Reality Project. But like this position itself had come about as a result of a lot of like workshops and trainings that had been done by the REJC, which is like y'all had done a collaboration with previously, and as well as other community-based organizations with state agencies like DEM, with legislators, with other like officials and stakeholders, like in I think it was about 2 years of trainings and workshops around racial equity, environmental justice, and various other like EIJ topics that came out with outcomes. One of those outcomes being the Providence Climate Justice Plan. Another of those outcomes is this position, right? And from this position, it was our director in DEM, Terry Gray, would come out and like ask the question, like what does the community need from this role, and the community created that position, right? And in order to allow for the states to have a position to like function as it does. This is where the collaboration with the Nature Conservancy comes in, to where I am housed as like a Nature Conservancy employee, but as far as on how I'm able to operate, it is through the state. That is the.
Got it. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
All right. Let's hear from Greg first, and then we'll have both.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Need that back.
Yeah, same here, like.
All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Greg Ohadoma. I am the Energy Justice Manager with the Office of Energy Resources. Essentially, my job is to make sure that we're including equity and justice into all of our policies and programs. And our different teams that we have with the office is renewables, transportation, energy efficiency, and our lead by example team. Definitely have other outputs that deeper in, such as our renewables team. But yeah, in short, energy justice is an offshoot of environmental and climate justice to allow that, you know, all people deserve a reliable, safe, and affordable energy source. So I do my best to make sure that we're thinking about that through all of our processes. And, you know, very similar to Chris's role, making sure that we're listening to the community and bringing all of their issues or, you know, concerns about our programs or policies that involve the energy system to the forefront when we're thinking about our development of these programs. That's really my role in short. I mean, we do, you know, our community outreach. Right now, I haven't done as much as I probably should have.
Grant writing, right?
Yeah, I've been deep into grant writing. There's been a lot of funding, as I'm sure you guys are all aware. There's a lot of different aspects of that funding that required my role and this knowledge of energy justice to be attributed. That mostly has to do with Justice 40, which is the federal government kind of took that from New York's greater plan, which making sure that at least 40% of benefits are going towards disadvantaged communities. And Rhode Island, I believe, have used underserved communities, but you know, disadvantaged communities can be looked up online through the White House Climate and Environmental Justice tool, screening tool. But essentially, there's a whole bunch of different variables that would define what a disadvantaged community is. But here in Rhode Island, our disadvantaged communities would be Providence, Pawtucket, Central Falls, Woonsocket, East Providence, Warren, parts of South Kingstown, Westerly, parts of Newport and Middletown, parts of Middletown. And so a lot of that funding that we're trying to obtain, we want to make sure that's going to be directed to those communities to try to make sure that we can kind of resolve or remediate some of the past environmental harms that have been targeted to those communities. So, you answer anything else?
Yeah, we'll do the discussion now. I'll put the camera on you. Actually, since you just mentioned that, Greg, let me ask one question about that. And actually, when we were looking through the IRA for funding opportunities as well, like at the city level for some city council engagement, I noticed there was a few different ways of referring to the communities. Sometimes it says disadvantaged, sometimes it says overburdened. From you all that have been like steeped in these topics, what do you think is there's been in another group we're working on the environmental council bylaws, there was discussion about this, like by saying disadvantaged, are we kind of putting that on individuals versus frontline communities or overburdened? So what's your preference, and does it matter, and why?
Oh man, I mean, for the federal government, it matters.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the word disadvantage, I think, does end up putting a lot of onus on these communities, and it's absolutely not their fault.
Right.
I have lately been using underserved because I mean that's exactly what they are. It's communities that have traditionally not been allocated enough funds to, do a lot of the things that other communities have been able to do. And even if you kind of look at it in a more narrow view, a lot of neighborhoods that have just been, you know, kind of run down and not had support.
Yeah, so it kind of shifts the responsibility, right?
Yeah.
You have any comments on that?
Oh, yeah, I was just like, for, you know, to Greg's point, like to the federal government, like to those grant applications, to getting those funds, like as far as they're like, though these are disadvantaged communities. So for us in like state offices or even academic spaces, like we are forced to use these terms that the community itself do not identify as.
Right.
So like to the extent too, like saying like overburdened or underserved, like both can be true at once for especially like these, you know, these communities that are usually low income, people of color, like low English proficiency, to where this is where a movement, at least, you know, I'm seeing is like toward to focus on these areas as environmental justice focus areas rather than like calling them exclusively like these are disadvantaged communities, these are overburdened communities, that having them be environmental justice focus areas encapsulates all of that. So you're able to like point to something and say like this is what it is, like rather than like putting the burden and onus on the individuals who have really like that had no real like, you know, involvement in like the harm that has like been put onto them. So that's what I wanted to add.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting in the same federal law that like the term wasn't standardized there.
Yeah.
But yeah, of course, like I assume there's criteria that these neighborhoods you mentioned and cities you mentioned.
Yeah,
have
there's
met.
about
Yeah.
25 criteria, or maybe 28. And then like the criteria that's listed is, it really just kind of digs into different aspects, some of the aspects that Chris mentioned. So, you know, there's a lot of health issues that would pop up on there. And I believe education as well within those, and workforce development. So just workforce in general, and then development, and then what kind of development that's happening in that area.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Maybe Greg, you can start with this one since you have such long policy experience, but for both of you, you know, being in these agencies, like you can get a lot done, but also we know they're under-resourced. So thinking about the agency work versus legislation, like what do you see of the relative usefulness of both? Like, and are they, and yeah, feel free, you know, we work a lot on legislation, but then oftentimes it's like delegates your agency to do things that maybe there's not the capacity to do, especially thinking forward to next session. You know, Environmental Justice Act has been brought up a number of years, haven't gotten that through yet. There's like Green Justice Zones bill, which are great, but I guess maybe a diplomatic question we can ask is like, can those laws go far enough if they don't come with more resources for your agencies to do this work?
I think the simple answer would be no. I don't think they can. I think, in my personal opinion, is, you know, when folks are drafting laws and when legislators are looking at these laws and bills, that they should really be trying to connect with the agencies that are going to be, you know, implementing these things. Because there's a lot of work to do, and our team at OER is pretty small. So having the onus to do all this other stuff, as well as the new things that are going to be, you know, given to us by those, it's a lot to do. I mean, we're obviously happy to do it for the most part, but having the support is absolutely needed.
Any comments, Chris?
You asked a very, very interesting question, because this is like me, Chris Gaynor, responding in a selfish manner in the way that you bring up the point of like, you know, like the green justice like zones, like the bill coming through. There's the Environmental Justice Act, like, and there's other like legislation that includes environmental justice like projects or implementation to some degree. In our current like state like capacity, like my concern is that as the climate justice specialist for the state, and that being the sole title of the state, will this all fall on me? Will this all fall on our department, right? And that is a personal thing. So to the extent of like, you know, like who or like what can be done like in regards to legislation to increase capacity of like these agencies, is to consider the importance of community engagement, right? And this is like, and I'm speaking from like the nonprofit spaces of like where I worked also, like also with the Nature Conservancy, of like having community organizers that are able to do this work, to have the ear of like or have the ear on the ground to like listen to like the concerns of the public, listen to the concerns of like the neighborhoods at large, to understand like this is how current policies impact them. How can we change that? Great. We've had this discussion with both our state agents that, you know, we've been having these conversations with, because we've been calling, we've been like making sure that like, you know, like we know what's going on. The state agencies themselves are responsible enough to like respond to the calls and like be able to like, you know, like say like, hey, this is what's happening. This is how you're like, this is how it would make, you know, our jobs easier if this were to happen, and your lives easier if this were to happen. That can then be written legislation to at least meet back there. Because for the current job, like I am, you know, I'm a strategist, I'm an events coordinator, and I'm a community like, and I do community engagement. Like those three I'm told are all jobs, right? So what Greg and I have like
Just 3 jobs, just
there, right? Like so Greg, what Greg and I have advocated for is recognizing that we are the only justice positions for the state. That at state level, at municipal level, at government, insert government level, that there is someone, be it justice, be it community, be it like some form of engagement or program management, that is prepared for when the funds come through, that a project needs to happen. There's someone there that can grab those reins, and that we are here to support with our resources, rather than it all coming on our place.
Interesting. So like mainstreaming it across the agency.
Right.
Yeah. How has the culture shifted and evolved since you all have started your positions? I mean, I think a lot of us have been doing learning on this topic. I imagine you in your jobs had to do teaching for your colleagues. And are you seeing that? How have you seen that change since you started? And it does feel that this topic is getting more attention now. Is that your perception as well? Is it still a little bit lonely?
I mean, that's okay. It's like a two-part question for me, because I think that my office was well versed on this topic. So I'm not the first person to hold my position in the office. I actually had somebody, a predecessor. However, they were on a contract position, and their contract was ended. And so now my office decided, oh, we need this person to be a full-time employee. So I think that thought process right there is, you know, big thumbs up. And like, you know, I would probably say though, like, you know, similar to what Chris is saying, it's a lot for one person to do. It's a long process as well. And like, in my eyes, this is a team type of event, right? You need to have people focus on a lot of different things, because we're getting a lot of things thrown at us at the same time.
Yeah.
So that answers, am I lonely?
Me.
I have Chris.
What's good?
But I mean, as a whole, like similar to what Chris was saying about all the different agencies need to be focused on their respective energy or respective justice topics. I think it's really important. There's the engagement that's needed to really get to the root of a lot of issues that have been, you know, kind of hurt deeply a lot of different neighborhoods, a lot of different communities, and that's not just within our state, that's across the nation, not across the world. So this is something that I think a lot of people should be opening their eyes to, and I think that is why it's getting a lot of attention right now, is that people are opening their eyes.
Thank you.
Yeah. I am an optimist to a fault. And I would say like within my office, I see like environmental justice is a new term, like in like the past, like, you know, like decade, right? Now within like our offices, like that is still being understood as to like, how does this apply to my program specifically? I understand the overarching, like this is the all like equal involvement of all persons, regardless of like race, gender, background, in the implementation and planning of like regards to environmental spaces. But where that connection is of just like, but how does this look in this technical report that I'm writing about this thing? And oftentimes the answer to the question is like, yeah, just introduce it to the public. You don't have to give like a whole like spiel on it. Just like, hey, this is the thing that I'm working on, right? And you know, like to me, I don't like I see a slow movement towards that understanding. Like one of my my favorite things to talk about was my second week, right? I was asked about like what would I consider like an environmental justice issue in New England, and I would say like that would be like black mold in your attic. Like, what do you mean? And I would say like for the sake of argument, that you have lived in this and lived in a like whatever you lived in a historic home in New England for 20, 30 years. This has existed in your family potentially for a generation. Like, let's give that historic timeline, right? Now with with climatic shifts, with increased precipitation events, having longer, hotter days, having moisture being able to be trapped in your attic now, right? And because of insulation being strained for like historical buildings, that is now stuck in there, growing black mold. To the persons that have been living there now, like there is generations of no one having asthma. Now suddenly there's a new generation of youth or like older adults having asthma with, I don't understand, how did this happen? I am far away from any form of environmental hazards. What has just happened into my environment? And that is like right there, like you've just been impacted by a climate justice like issue there, where the environmental injustices come in. Is you have this home that has now black mold. What resources is the state providing you in order to remedy that? The answer is nothing. And also we've taken like the resources from you for you not to actually like fix any of that. Then that becomes truly an injustice that we need to rectify. And that's what I like. Yeah, that that took me on a tangent, but yeah, I am seeing that progress currently where that is presently being recognized in DEM offices. It's just right now we are looking as to how and what next.
Great. Thanks for sharing that example. I'll just ask one more question, then we'll get to turn it over to the audience. In terms of community engagement, you can start with this one, Chris, for you.
Sure.
You know, we know environment issues has been kind of it can be messaged as like an issue out there in the environment that like white people care about, and they go to the mountains and they are in some, you know, environment, and this doesn't apply to me in a different type of community or income setting, right? But that's kind of a stereotype, and we know that everyone likes to have a cool neighborhood, enjoy parks, enjoy spaces, health, as you mentioned. So what have you found like resonates and really are the pain points that people in the communities are feeling, and how can we maybe like use the same language to be talking about the same things a bit more in that space? So is it health? Is it about the heat and the coming changes that are affecting people's children? Or I guess like any way that you want to respond to that sort of polemic.
No, it's an interesting question because that really depends on who I'm talking to.
Mm-hmm.
Like that really, because to the extent of like health, it really depends if like you're living in a neighborhood where like you walk outside and the first thing you feel is like out of breath because it's that hot, or like because like, you know, your home itself is not providing you like the ability to have like healthy air to breathe. And as you're walking from your home into a heat with zero like green cover, like to your bus stop that is real janky, that doesn't actually have a cover, you're now like, you probably spend like, from that knowing how bus times work, an hour and a half of your day miserable before you go to work, right? I'm talking to this person who's like, you need shade, don't you? Like, then to the extent of like, you know, like parents and like, you know, grandparents who have kids, like their first concern is the youth that they interact with. Right. So where, you know, like the joke with like, you know, Gen Z, right, is like, you know, go outside, touch grass, right? Like that's kind of the theme, right? Of just like as making sure that like there are like green spaces and green places for youth and young adults to like be able to recreate and do. So like it also gives these like places like, you know, like for parents and grandparents a reprieve for their kids to go off and do the thing over there safely. So like it's not a hard answer, but like in the way that like, you know, like depending on the interest of the person or the community itself, that is what I'm talking about then and then. And how do I connect that with whatever policy that our state agency is engaged with, and what legislation is influencing that policy that could impact that?
Greg, any comments?
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, health is a big one, but I think it might be a little bit easier for me because I kind of just bring up the money.
Yeah.
A lot of people feel energy burdens in their pockets, and when we're talking about different aspects, I mean, I think the easiest thing for me is to then point to energy efficiency and let people know that, you know, ways to decrease your energy bill is to kind of amp up on your measures and energy efficiency. If that means you might need some new appliances, we have programs for that, or we'll be coming with programs with that. If that means you need to, you know, change out your lights, there are programs for that. And then get deeper into a lot of the other programs and teams that we have in our office. You know, if you're having, I mean, Chris gave up the example, the bus stop. You know, if you're tired of waiting for that bus and you're looking for a new way of travel and you want to make that investment, we have, you know, EV programs, or we have our electric bike program, which is really popular. And that gives you, you know, an easy new form that's going to be clean, and you don't necessarily have to worry about that. But I mean, like I pointed out, the first thing was health. I mean, our energy system is historically been dirty, not clean, and unhealthy. And if you live near one of these sites, you're probably going to be the ones that feeling it the most. I mean, fortunately for Rhode Island, our well, I think we have 3 plants, and they're, you know, honestly some of the cleanest in New England, which is like that's great, but I mean, in comparison. So you know, the health aspect, I think, well, for me, that my first experience with energy justice, you know, heating my house with an oven, that's not great. You know, you grow up having asthma, your kids will have asthma, and those, when you point out that is probably the cause of that now, the health issue, that will spark somebody's mind and say, oh, that's what that is, and that's how it's been affecting these years.
I'd like to add, like, to the extent of, you know, just the perception of that these, you know, hiking in the woods, these green places is a predominantly like white space. In the working conversations that I try to like do is insert myself in that story where, you know, like take ownership of the area that you are in. Be proud of it, and in a way that, like, you know, how would you improve it and why, right? And I like to pull at those like personal stories, personal anecdotes, because like even for me, right, like I would say like I've been involved in the environmental field now for like 7+ years. I've cared a lot more about the species that exist in the environment in the past 3. Reason being is that I had lived in like Vermont for like 3 years prior to pandemic, so it was better then. And I was able to just like really experience that natural environment because someone had told me like, this is yours to regulate. Like I was shown these are the spots that you can go, these are the places that you can actually see. You can do this, right? So it's also like, you know, for myself in the position that I'm in, it's like kind of like attempting to at least steward that path for others to see that you can also exist in these spaces.
Thank you. Thanks for that work. All right, let's hear questions here in person, and then we'll open up to the chat and folks on Zoom to unmute and ask a question as well. Trent, go ahead.
Yeah, this black mold problem. So, which agencies would address that?
That would be the, yeah. Oh, sorry.
You know, how will they do it, and how do you address that problem?
That's a great question. Like I don't have like a real answer to that, but that was just an example that I had brought up because that is a general concern in community that I've noticed that have like that issue, right? So I can't speak to which division specifically would be addressing like that issue in that home, but it would be a DEM issue.
I mean, the larger question is, we're talking about climate justice.
Sure.
Recognize there are areas where I'm sure people, infrastructure, your power plants, pollution, or they don't have enough trees, or.
Right.
So, I mean, it seems like that's a massive undertaking. It's needed, absolutely, that is justice. Because, you have more extreme weather effects, flooding, fires and things. So I mean, there are people who are more exposed to these problems than others.
Yeah.
But I mean, it seems like that's, we're talking $1 trillion project, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I know in Rhode Island, there's the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank that does funnel funds to various communities that have done a resilience plan. So there is money being spent. Do you guys try to influence how they do that?
That's an interesting question, but like for influence, I would say that with the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank, like DEM and like the Nature Conservancy, or with the municipal resiliency program that they operate, and like through the green bond, as I understand it, like that's where like all of like the funding is able to be distributed to these communities. But regards to influencing where and how, I don't think we have that influence, because where it's going is determined on the needs of the municipalities, to which so far we've interviewed 35 of 36. I don't remember how many municipalities are in Rhode Island right now. But it's in like the higher,
Right.
yeah, like the higher 30s. So like each have been more or less evaluated because they had shown up to these conversations like fully, like this is what's happening in our community, this is what's going on, and from that is where we determine like these are the projects they would like funded. So the community determines what projects are going to like be funded.
I just wonder if they're prioritizing, the most needed areas.
Oh, to that extent, yes. Like to that extent, yes. And that is like from at least where DEM's like side with the environmental justice focus areas that we spoke of, as well as like the that's a good song. And like in the areas that Greg specifically like focused on, like Providence itself, Central Falls, Pawtucket, Woonsocket, like areas of Newport, like those are always top of mind when we are speaking like with these groups, making sure that at least like that okay, like there's an area in like Pawtucket that like needs like this particular funding. What were the like primary issues of Pawtucket? Move that money there, because we want to ensure that like those communities are uplifted and get it.
My last one, final question.
Sure.
I understand that Governor McKee is hiring the chief resilience officer.
That's
Does
correct.
that happen? Or-
The person has, I think, yes, I believe the person has been hired. I do not know. Hold on. I don't know what I can say.
Okay. All right.
Soon,
Well,
coming
yep.
soon.
Coming soon, everyone.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
in other words, you will be working with that person.
Yes, they would be a part of the climate team that I discussed with the director. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was a little surprised about the black mold issue being the example of your example of environmental justice.
Sure.
Because I was thinking that it was going to be lead-paint mediation, which I always thought was the classic example of residential environmental justice. So speaking of, what's the state of the art with that? That thing that
The
goes
lead
back
paint?
30, 40 years in research, development, and remediation. Is that all taken care of, or is that still an issue?
That's still a big issue. I just
Still a big issue?
Yeah. like, use that example because that was the example that I had.
Just checking in about it.
Yeah, it's still a problem.
I took your-
Like,
You guys would be fixing it.
I know there was a bill that passed last session that allocates more money to try to work on that, probably more work for your agencies, but yeah, it's tragic, right, that that's still continuing, so thanks for mentioning that issue. Do you have a question?
Yeah, hi, I haven't been you guys in a while. When it comes to Rhode Island's renewable energy goals, I know that we have really ambitious ones that we want to meet. But when it comes to making sure that that energy is affordable for communities in Rhode Island, what kind of like projects or strategies or grants like, what are you working on to make sure that if we do try to reach that goal, it's affordable?
The Greg question.
That's a great question. Yeah, that'd be probably.
Yeah.
That's. So our office is looking at that in a couple of different ways. Obviously going after as much federal funding as possible, and trying to either create new programs or modify old ones. I think the best example I can say about that kind of just is a perfect example of trying to remediate some of the energy justice issues in the state is our affordable solar access program, which will be launching pretty soon. And that program essentially is a low financing program that would allow low income homeowners to get solar on their roofs. I would also say, that question is a loaded for me because I think about energy and then I think about affordability, and that affordability aspect is like in comparison to what, right? So I always think like, well, if everybody starts getting paid more, then energy would be affordable if it's still at the same price right now, right? So I will throw in a lot of our workforce development things that we're trying to do to make sure that people are getting well-paying jobs, or good-paying jobs actually, within this field that's already here, but it's growing everywhere. So I think one that we just submitted yesterday to give more funding towards Building Futures, which is a pre-apprenticeship program here in the state that focuses on getting residents from underserved communities or environmental focus, justice focus areas to be engaged in the apprentice or pre-apprenticeship of construction trades, and then it's a pathway into unions. And then we're also kind of did that, and then on the other side of that, working to kind of stand up a certificate program for those who are kind of more interested in, I would say, the software science aspect of maintenance on electric vehicle charging stations. So fingers crossed we get that, but those are the kind of things that we're looking at the office to make sure that we can meet those goals.
Really interesting to tackle it from both sides. Yes.
My husband is brilliant, energy and solar inventor. And I'm just wondering, is there anyone really in the state or in your offices anyway who is really looking into innovation? Because he has so many examples of things that can meet our needs, and that can he's a tremendous problem solver. And I'm sure there are other people that have something to offer, but where in the heck do the inventors go? Where is Edison today?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately our state doesn't necessarily have a place for startups, at least to my knowledge, besides CIC. But I would probably say there's other programs.
There's like Social Enterprise Greenhouse, Ride Hub. There's a couple of different innovations. You could go to one of the venture cafe nights over at CIC. There's a couple of different forms. I would look into the Social Enterprise Greenhouse though. That might be your best bet. They do have like a coaching thing for bringing innovation into like monetized fruition. And that's about all I know. Like I don't know anything more than that.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Social Enterprise Greenhouse.
DOE also has an innovation branch, and if you have something that's innovative, I'd probably pitch it to them as well.
DOE of the State Department of Energy?
Federal.
Not federal. I have tried that. They, in conjunction with two professors from UMass Amherst, which is nationally ranked for their engineering, and I got really strange results. Normally, they turn around your preliminary application in 3 weeks. They turned ours around in 14 weeks, and then they changed a longstanding policy of
commenting on your application so that you will be encouraged to try again. They said suddenly, nope, we can't comment on your application and we can't tell you why. That's it.
Sorry to hear that. We'll keep this one focused on the environmental justice issues, but maybe afterwards we can discuss some ideas. I'll go Jeff and then here.
A lot of the programs seem to be focused on low-income homeowners, but in these areas, there's a lot of rental units. I mean, that seems like a difficult problem, dealing with landlords, especially if they don't live in the home.
You brought up the student issues. You haven't even brought up the student issues. Like, yeah, because like there's like the students themselves are a temporary population that also influence like the renting in spaces like that. So at least for our side, I do not have an answer to that question.
Yeah, I would say that's a greater issue that a lot of states are trying to tackle. How to keep landlords responsive and making sure that a lot of this onus is on them, because it's hard to put that on a tenant when they're not the ones who make those final decisions on a house.
Yeah. I have a client who had moved, got an apartment, and she wasn't aware of any of this. And her children feel very insane because there are not even storm windows on this house. It's a bare crack.
I assume it's an older house.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I live in all of those.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely thinking about how to tackle that issue. So I can say that.
Yeah, nice.
Here, we're gonna go here next.
Hi, so I work with Rhode Island Student and I work for Snowman with them and one kind of figure out the way to word this question. So work with a lot of academics and researchers, and one source of frustration for me is trying to figure out how to get the researchers and people at the academic level to actually engage with communities and identify research needs and not just research wants of the researcher that's been doing the research for 10 years. Do you have any advice for how best to start those conversations or how to get academics and researchers out of the ivory tower and into the communities? That's a hard question. Can you fix this problem?
This is what I've tried, right? And what I've tried to do is remind the academics and researchers that they are not separate from the very communities, like that, they're speaking about. Like, if you are working, to me, if you live and work in an area, you are amongst that community, right? So to have that, I like the ivory tower metaphors because like you, the researcher who's probably been in this position for X amount of years, who's lived in this area for X amount of years, coming out of that institution to research a community that you've been aware of for how many years, like these are your neighbors, right? Bringing it down to like, what is it exactly do you want for like the community to research? How does that connect to even your own life? Like, how is that significant? How would that be significant for you, let alone significant for that community? And I'm thinking of Breathe Providence specifically in their tact of like focusing on air quality monitoring and how they're constantly trying to like ask communities, it's like, where do you want the monitors? Like so to that end, I would say just like we're being thoughtful and intentional, reminding those researchers that like you are not separate from this community. Like yeah. So
I also add that CARI now has a higher education team. We are working with higher education, precisely what you're talking
Oh, great.
about. Yeah. So I can talk to you after.
Please, yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yes, I forgot to ask, trying to see if the education team has any upcoming meetings to
Meeting
mention.
at Brown on September 12th.
Okay,
It's called Lab.
environment lab.
Whatever it was called, something lab.
Yeah.
We met there once.
Yeah.
Very good.
September 12th. So fine, Trent, if you have one more question. All right, anyone on Zoom or in the chat have a question to ask? Give them a second. Maybe type it in the chat or do the raise your hand icon. You can figure that out because I have muted everyone.
Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not. Here. And this is a super easy question for you guys.
I don't believe you.
Thank you.
Weird. But, so you guys you both work for the state, you work for different, one for office, one for the department. And then you're working with CARI. Are there any other groups that you work with, community groups? And then like, in what capacity do you work with? I don't know.
My eyes went wide because literally the Rolodex just like went in my head.
So you guys have like a bunch of, because all of the climate justice hours have been in partnership with CARI, or have they not?
No.
No, okay.
Yeah.
This is our first partnership.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Hopefully
so
first of
there was
many.
one with the nature, okay, I got it.
The one with the Nature Conservancy, that partnership is because
Yeah,
that is like my
Right.
parent like organization, and they like supported with the why am I forgetting catering? There it is. Like they supported like that as well as some other expenses. So that's
and then the last one that had, the book reading thing.
that was CARI, that was not us.
Got it,
Yeah.
okay.
We were there as spectators.
Got it, okay.
So you do some work with groundwork? Well,
We not directly, but we are in conversation with members of Groundwork when it comes to like grant applications and like various funding opportunities, to where we connect with like folks like Groundworks, Building Futures, organizations like the RAJC, the People's Port Authority, Movement Education Outdoors, Gold Fleece, Psycho for Roots to Empower, Rolodex, come on, buddy. And then there's like, and now like with both of our work, you know, we're doing ongoing connection with other organizations like across Rhode Island to ensure that we have that like constant, like, you know, like groups of community that we can work with, like CARI, for example, to do these kind of workshops and or have some form of partnership to do something.
Yeah, I might partner with you to try to get a list of, I think ECRI's trying to do that as well, but like, it'd be cool to have all these consolidated on our website. Or at least like, you know, a few by category. You can consider it. Marnie, I know you have a question. Go ahead.
I do. First of all, thank you, Climate Action Rhode Island, for having this. I was going to come in person, but I had to cancel at the last minute, so I'm grateful for the Zoom opportunity. I want to know, like, what those of us as individuals and those of us working in organizations can do to support and advocate for everything that you're all doing.
Another loaded question. I'll take that first.
Okay.
So I think just attending some of the events that we have and kind of spreading it amongst your network would be the first thing I would say. And I would also just state that, you know, the work that me and Chris do isn't necessarily our work. It's other people's work, and we're just kind of amplifying it. Honestly, this is a lot of it is what's actually going on in the community, and there are other groups that are really dealing with this on the day-to-day basis. Residents who are facing this every day, they are the ones that have their kids getting hospitalized, taking them to the emergency room multiple times a year for asthma attacks. And we're kind of giving a highlight to some of these issues and bringing it back to our agencies and our offices and letting them know this is what the community is facing, and this is some of the things that we've been told, and let's make some action items on how to attack it. So
No, I love that, because like this is what Jock, like I'm thinking again of like your question about the academics and like having like higher ed folks too, just where do you live, right? Like that's first and foremost, like I would ask, like to the individuals, like, where do you live? And like for myself, I mentioned in passing that I live in Onlyville. In Onlyville, the first thing that I found is like, oh, look, the Woonasquatucket River, can I jump in? To which everyone yelled at me and said, no, do not jump into that river. So I asked the question, why? And that for me, it's like, I learned, oh, talk to Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council. I went to them, and then that's when we had conversations. So in my own private personal capacity, before I even started the job, I was already curious as to what is already going on in my neighborhood, right? And there I was able to learn like what groups already existed from like, you know, there's an Osaka Watershed Council, there's a steel yard, and there's like the Farm Fresh Project doing a lot of stuff. So like for me, like day one of the job, I was like, oh, I already got contacts, right? But for the individual, those are opportunities for you to engage, for you to volunteer, for you to be amongst the very community in which you live, for you to understand the problems that exist in that community. So yeah, like to tying it back to like how you do it like into your like your work. The question I tend to ask myself like throughout is like, how is this walk impacting my job? Because I walk to work, like I don't own a car. And on hot days, I do not enjoy going to work. On rainy days, I don't go to work. I work from home. So like there's this influence in my head is like I reimagine the entire walkway as like how could this look better if these things in policy were implemented for me to enjoy this walk? And so far, the conclusion that I have is that the entire road will be shut down and there's a trolley system there. But I have not moved on from that. So, but yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, and I want to add it, and just also supporting groups that you know that are working on these kind of issues.
Yeah.
I mean, we named a few, and we're definitely happy to send those websites over to CARI so they can kind of spread it amongst their group. But I think that also really helps. A lot of these organizations face issues with a lack of capacity, and that prevents them from, I guess, not saying doing the work that they're doing, but at a bigger scale, right? So.
Yeah. I'll just also give a quick shout out to our politics team and Providence local team, Marnie. So we do a lot of like lobbying showing up at the State House. So that'll be like meetings every other Wednesday, really kicking it off in the fall to plan for the legislative session. And then we have like champions and we show up in the hearings and testify, including on the, you know, environmental justice bill, PIP, like these, and I think that'll be something we want to incorporate more into, also advocating that these issues get put into other bills so that it's not just like those one-off ones. And then with the Providence City Council, we're pressuring them to like implement the climate justice plan that you mentioned.
Please. Yeah.
So we'd love to have you involved.
Right, no
Yeah,
problem.
I'll send you a follow-up email, no pressure, but another way anyone can get involved. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you guys for all of the work that you do as well.
Can you speak up just a little bit?
Sorry.
Yeah.
So my name is Anna and I'm the owner of the Kilograms. We are a zero waste refill station for back body products. And we're trying to help tackle like plastic pollution through our business. And right now I'm serving mostly like the Pacific community, but I want to, you know, branch out and help serve the Providence community as well. And I also advocate, you know, through our business profile, through our Instagram on social justice issues, environmental justice. But I want to be able to support, you know, what you guys are doing a lot more, and also kind of have like that visual support as well, to be able to like bring our products and our refillables and the education around plastic pollution to Providence. So I'm just kind of wondering like if there's any opportunity there. I know you're working with Shove and White House.
I have in the
Okay.
past. And I mean,
Yeah.
obviously our office is kind of, you know, bringing that some of these issues to them. So they're able to also advocate on the federal level, but yeah. You can
So-
definitely connect.
Okay.
And
I'll need to get your information. Mostly because what you just described is something that I have been currently looking for because of a conference that is happening sometime in November, as I am announcing this right now, I guess. Like the Northeast Recycling Council is hosting a conference in November, specifically like for the topic that DEM is doing is scaling new recycling operations in environmental justice communities. And what you've just like described seems to fit into like that category, to where you are like, you know, repurposing and like reusing like plastic products to create these things. So I would like to talk to you in a different capacity, because that is a part, like, you know, of the work, and I really admire what you're doing.
Yeah, congrats on your business. What's the name? Say the name again.
The Heel Room.
The Heel Room.
Yeah.
I don't have business cards today.
Yeah, I
Whoa.
don't have business cards.
Dang.
Definitely would love to talk about that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, recycling as the infrastructure for recycling
Yeah,
becomes better, you know, we need some type of solutions for
yeah.
plastic pollution. You know, reusing, refilling, it's a one way to combat that.
Right. Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I also recently learned about how, you know, in a lot of cultures, that's just been like the way of doing things, right? Like cultures have reused Tupperwares or what, you know, all
Yeah.
kinds of things like that. So it's really cool to bring those like practices that have been there a long time up to date. Okay, on the chat, any final questions? We're at time, so we're gonna wrap it up kind of soon. John, did you want to ask a question? Okay. I have one final one, or does anyone have a pressing question in the room? You go. Okay, so, you know, climate action, Rhode Island, we did originate like quite focused on reducing emissions of greenhouse gases, trying to like slow the climate crisis from that angle through policy, protests, like trying to shut down those polluting industries. And I'm wondering if you can just help us connect the dots, because of course, where those polluting industries are located affects these communities. But some of the issues that we're discussing are not related to like driving climate change, but then the impacts are. And then, I mean, something we've been talking about is like mining for the metals that we'll need in all the EVs and things like that. Like, where are those going to be located, right? And like on indigenous land and things like that. So can you help us connect justice issues with like the emission side of it and where those burdens fall, and like how are those two issues linked in your minds?
Giant is last question.
Man, all right. Oh,
The easy one.
now, because everything that just like ran through my mind from like the justice lens, I'm thinking from like infrastructure and like transportation, like the fact that like you're just near a highway alone, that's a fact that there's like emissions there. Now you're inserting like polluting industry 1, 2, 3x. Now that there's that in the mindset, right? And now I'm thinking of like that lack of like green space or like, you know, minimized tree canopy, which allows for greater trapping of heat and those emissions in that space. And I'm like, wow, that is a lot of impact for any community to really receive. And that, as I would see, that is an environmental justice community right there. Like just the fact, like if you are not only like near a highway, you have polluting industry, you don't have any reprieve from the natural ability to recycle all of those toxins out in the air with at least trees, you're suffering. So I don't know if I answered the question, but that is where my brain went.
Love it. Yeah, yeah, you do. What comes to mind for you, Greg?
Yeah, a lot. I'm still trying to piece together. So it's like this is all right.
Just word vomit. Like
Yeah, okay,
like
yeah, all right, I'm gonna throw it out.
Throw it out.
So, I think about it like energy burdens, right? And energy insecurity, and essentially that would be a household's inability to provide basic energy needs. And then what would we do to remediate that? And you know, like I mentioned before, you have different programs, and then you know, you have the transportation aspect. That is just a whole thing. That's a big thing. Because I mean, even in the states, statewide, right? If we think about just the United States and then the like cobalt and other minerals that would be needed for electric vehicles, that is, it's like some of them, it's so bad. It's just so bad. It's like, if you think about it, like a lot of mines provide jobs, and like jobs are good, but what kind of jobs are they? And how has that affected a generation, multiple generations of people working in those conditions? But then you look at it and like, wow, we really need to get rid of our current mode of transportation, because that's really bad as well. And then, you know, I would definitely promote like carpooling. So I can say that, promote carpooling, because that kind of
the solution to it all.
that eliminates one more car on the road. And so that's the transportation aspect. But like, I try to get really residential with energy justice, and then like thinking about it on what a single person can do to kind of minimize their emissions themselves. So like energy democracy, solar storage, but then all those things cost money.
Yeah.
And they're not cheap. Not yet. Hopefully they'll be there soon, but we can think about, at least on the state side, programs and ways to get those costs down. And then on the workforce development side, good paying jobs that will allow people to obtain those kind of things.
Ooh,
Because, I mean, in some ways, the cost is low over time, right?
Yeah,
So,
your ROI, your return on investment. Yeah.
The upfront costs,
Yeah,
a
exactly.
lot of these things
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. And then interest rates are a whole different thing. So
I mean, in general, electricity costs down. Solar, and wind is cheaper to produce.
yeah, and then the more you put online,
It just takes time.
and building like more on like your point of just the workforce development, like kind of like just onboarding like those adults into these like positions and careers. What I think of too is just how are we approaching the education like in the climate literacy of our youth specifically? Because if they're unclear and unaware as to exactly what we are doing, like what the Greg and I are doing, what the state is doing, then there's going to continue that gap of knowledge and understanding as to what is to happen next for their future, right? So as long, as like we are fostering their ability to operate in this world that we are creating that has these green, blue jobs and careers that they can imagine these things to also exist, that is also the work and able to like, uplift.
I'll also add on to that.
Hell yeah.
I mean, this is a little separate tangent, but like the education piece is, I think, one of the biggest barriers in this field is like how does the energy affect you? How does the environment actually affect you?
Yeah.
And understanding that and also putting it in layman's terms for people to really understand and grasp and be able to also spit that back out to somebody as they understood it in their own words is something that we need to be really thinking about. And I think that kind of, if that becomes a mindset, turning off that light that you're not in a room that you're not in anymore ends up decreasing emissions.
Okay, final question, then we'll wrap
But
up.
when you think of environmental justice, it's hard to think of environmental justice on the earth without thinking of like people in Africa.
Sure.
I know that a lot of our trash and hazardous material is being shipped to Africa, and it's polluting their water systems. So what does Rhode Island do with trash?
That is a complex question that has a little bit of because like it's also like there is the bulk of like trash and garbage that is being shipped overseas, but also it's being sent back by like nations that are saying we cannot carry this anymore, so we are holding on to that excess trash. So having that excess trash on top of the trash that we were all creating, that even to the extent that you are correct, that like there are definitely like a large populace of environmental injustices occurring like in Africa, but even in the state of Rhode Island, though, even those like those pockets of trash are being either left or abandoned in those spaces. It's just unseen or unsmelled in some cases because like certain neighborhoods and districts are able to get the waste management like folks like able to like pick up the trash and things. So it's a part of the system and part of the disposal. To where where environmental injustice comes in, it is those communities that like are right here that they get trash pickup like once maybe every 2 months, and like that's just mountains. I don't say mountains. Like I don't want to like create anecdotes here, but yeah, basic that is like what I would think about like in response to at least the international scope of like garbage and like what it looks like even here too.
a big, the international burden and iniquity is really big to think about, you're right. All right, well, we really put these gentlemen on the spot with all the questions tonight. You can handle it very well, so thank you all for coming. Let's hear it for our speaker. Thanks for those joining on Zoom.
Thanks, Zoom folks.
Thank you. All right, have a good night. We'll announce the next September meeting fairly soon.